Dear colleagues and participants, may I have your attention for a while? The event will begin shortly in 2 minutes, so please kindly turn off your camera and microphone for non-speakers throughout the event. Thank you. A very warm welcome I bid to our honored speakers and guests to the third New Southern Policy Forum, Synergy between Korea's Green New Deal and ASEAN initiatives on green recovery and energy transition. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to be your MC on this occasion. My name is Nella, the Communication Officer at the ASEAN Center for Energy. Before we begin, I would like to kindly remind everyone in terms of the general guideline of the event today. I would like to kindly suggest everyone to turn off your microphone and camera to reduce the noises and only unmute if you wish to present or speak. And the last one, those who wish to ask or speak may use the chat room, then the moderator will acknowledge the request to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further delay, I would like to call upon His Excellency Lim Sung-nam, the Ambassador of the Republic of Korea to ASEAN, to recite the welcome remarks.
Good afternoon, everybody. Deputy Secretary General Satbinder Singh, so good to see you here on the computer screen after a while. Dr. Nuki Agia Utama, I hope my pronunciation is correct, Executive Director of ASEAN Center for Energy. Excellencies, professors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. As Ambassador of the Korean Mission to ASEAN, I'd like to welcome each and every participant of the third New Southern Policy, or NSP Forum, co-hosted with the ASEAN Center for Energy. The Korean Mission to ASEAN launched the NSP Forum in June 2020 with a view to creating a knowledge platform between Korea and ASEAN for sharing views and insights among key stakeholders and pertinent specialists. In particular, the second NSP Forum held this March focused on how to create synergy between the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, or ACRF, and Korea's New Southern Policy Plus, which is the upgraded version of the NSP. As all of you might be aware, both the New Southern Policy Plus and the ACRF were unveiled last November as core strategies for post-pandemic recovery and regional cooperation. While there are many common elements between these two strategies, all the participants of the second NSP Forum appreciate the insight of Dr. Lim Jok-hoi, Secretary General of ASEAN, who identified public health, digital transformation, and green recovery as key areas of cooperation between Korea and ASEAN in the post-pandemic era. Building upon what was discussed at the previous forum, today's NSP Forum will focus on green recovery under the theme of synergy between Korea's Green New Deal and ASEAN initiatives on green recovery and energy transition. Facing the serious challenges posed by the climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic, the international community now attaches great significance to green recovery and energy transition in order to build back better from the pandemic and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Likewise, ASEAN aims to facilitate transition into sustainable and renewable energy and build green infrastructure on the basis of the ACRF. In a similar vein, the Korean government announced last July the Korean New Deal, a national development strategy to support the country's recovery from the pandemic crisis. The Green New Deal, one of the three pillars of the Korean New Deal, aims to move towards a net zero society through green transition of infrastructure, low carbon and decentralized energy supply, and innovation in the green industry. Through the Green New Deal, we plan to inject $65 billion in government spending and create about 660,000 jobs by 2025. This May, the Korean government also successfully hosted the P4G, meaning Partnering for Green Growth and the Global Goals, Seoul Summit, under the theme of Inclusive Green Recovery towards Carbon Neutrality. Through the Seoul Declaration adopted by the summit, the leaders recognized that the climate crisis is a far-reaching issue beyond the environment agenda and reaffirmed that the COVID-19 pandemic should be overcome through green recovery. At the summit, President Moon Jae-in pledged to assist the energy transition of those developing countries which heavily rely on coal for generating power by significantly increasing climate and green-related ODA, as well as creating a Green New Deal Trust Fund worth $5 million annually. Even before the pandemic, Korea and ASEAN have been cooperating closely on climate change and green growth. At the ASEAN-Korea Commemorative Summit held in November 2019, President Moon and 10 ASEAN leaders agreed to promote green development, circular economy, sustainable consumption and production. They further agreed to address the challenges of climate change through the implementation of the Paris Agreement. It is exactly in this spirit that the Korea's New Southern Policy Plus emphasized the need to strengthen cooperation with ASEAN in addressing climate change and reducing carbon footprint. To materialize these goals, ASEAN-Korea Dialogue on Environment and Climate Change will be launched this September. I hope and believe today's forum will not only enable Korea and ASEAN to better understand each other's needs and capacities, but also inspire ourselves to come up with concrete cooperation programs on green recovery. In this regard, I would like to draw your attention to the Green New Deal ODA strategy recently unveiled by the Korean government, under which we are committed to develop flagship projects of GreenODA with the international community, including ASEAN countries in particular. The Korean mission to ASEAN will also be ready to work together with ASEAN in exploring the possibility of mobilizing the ASEAN-Korea Cooperation Fund for concrete action programs. Last but not least, I'd like to thank the ASEAN Center for Energy for the close cooperation with the mission in organizing this forum. Thank you, and I wish today's forum a great success. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. And now I would like to invite His Excellency Satvinder Singh, the Deputy Secretary General for ASEAN Economic Community, to convey his congratulatory remarks.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency Ambassador Ling Sum Nam. Very good to hear from you. I also would like to acknowledge Dr. Nuki, the Executive Director of ACE, distinguished delegates, participants. A very good afternoon to all of you. First, of course, big congratulations to the mission of the Republic of Korea to ASEAN, and also to the ASEAN Center for Energy for the excellent arrangements for the virtual convening of today's forum and for organizing this very important dialogue. I personally believe that to sustain the continuing progress of the ASEAN economic community, as what Ambassador have highlighted, the ASEAN member states have to continue to cooperate in exploring all viable pathways to secure the region's growing energy needs, while definitely we all have to ensure an orderly transition to a cleaner, greener, and a more sustainable energy future that will contribute to the global collective of lowering carbon emissions. In fact, last year, our ASEAN energy ministers, they adopted the ASEAN Plan for Action for Energy Cooperation, APIC Phase 2, with a very clear focus on energy transition and resilience that takes into account the energy opportunities and challenges brought about by the pandemic, the cross-cutting push for decarbonization and the response to climate change, as well as the overall pursuit of green growth and sustainable development for our societies. While there is no denying that the region in ASEAN continues to rely very largely on fossil fuels for energy, I must also say that the region has also, meanwhile, they have set ambitious low emission energy efficiency and renewable targets relative to the region's current capabilities, all part of ASEAN's longer term thrust to a more resilient, competitive, and sustainable future. However, our paths to sustainable energy future is not simply dependent on renewables. Instead, the ASEAN region more practically is looking at kind of a multi-pronged path. What I'm trying to say is that while the region aims to accelerate the deployment of solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, and biofuels, the ASEAN would also be exploring alternative sources from nuclear power, from hydrogen, from batteries and energy storage, and other emerging technologies. Moreover, ASEAN is also emphasizing the role of natural gas as a transition fuel and the promotion of lower carbon energy through the use of clean coal technologies, carbon capture utilization and storage, and other carbon recycling technologies to help us really manage the region's rising energy demand while mitigating on the emissions. A lot more practical approach, I assure you. As energy transition progresses in the region and globally, and as we strengthen policy frameworks and enabling environments to foster sustainable energy investments, the scaling up of financing and the deployment in the secure and affordable manner remain truly very crucial in the entire exercise. The region, of course, is definitely committed on enhanced cooperation with dialogue partners like the Republic of Korea, with working closely with international organizations, global infrastructure banks, with international global capital market players, all in order to have them, all of them come together to support ASEAN's long-term energy transition agenda. While we are getting a little bit worried about how some of the Western multilateral development banks and capital markets may only selectively want to finance renewable-related climate finance, this is where we are hoping that in Asia, we'll be working with our key dialogue partners like yourselves and the rest of the key partners in Asia, together with the ASEAN region, in order to foster a much more practical, a much more resilient, multi-pronged energy transformation strategy. ASEAN treasures its strategic partnership with the Republic of Korea in advancing our mutually beneficial economic and energy initiative that truly it aligns with the ASEAN's preferred multi-pronged ways and the ways of cooperation. We truly hope that today's forum will really help us to expand the synergy between the Republic of Korea Green New Deal and the ASEAN initiatives on green recovery and energy transition. We also look forward to jointly explore projects that promote practical, economical, but also lead to lower emission energy transformation growth for the region. I'm truly confident that today's discussion is going to provide constructive inputs to the future direction of the ASEAN and Republic of Korea cooperation. And once again, I'm wishing all of you a very successful forum today, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. And now I would like to invite the speakers, moderator, and ACE team to turn on your camera, please, as we will have a group photo together. Shania, can you turn off the slides for a while? Thank you. Dr. Nuki, Dr. Zulfikar, Dr. Virawat. Dr. Virawat, are you there? Okay, I think we just continue without him. Okay, in 3, 2, 1. One more time, 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, now please welcome Dr. Virawat Chantanakome. Hello, Dr. Virawat, can you hear me? Dr. Virawat?
Hello, good afternoon. So, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I got problem with my camera again. It's okay.
Okay. Okay,
So
so I
thank you
would
very
like
much.
I would like to read you a little bit about your short biography. So
Please.
Dr. Virawat is currently the Ministry Counselor for International Affairs from the Ministry of Energy in Thailand. Before joining the ministry, Dr. Virawat was the Chief Executive Officer of the Brunei National Energy Research Institute, or BNERI. Before joining BNERI, he was the Executive Director at the Asean Center for Energy. Dr. Virawat has over 25 years of experience in energy and environment program development in many organizations, locally and internationally, in energy security, low carbon strategies, clean and renewable energy, energy efficiency, and regional connectivity. Dr. Virawat received a PhD in energy policy from the University of Waterloo, Canada. Dr. Virawat, please, now the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, MC. Thank you so much. And then thank you and good afternoon to all, participants today. So I think, to begin with, we recognize that as you heard from Ambassador, Excellency Ambassador and Deputy Secretary, that the energy sector has, received impact from COVID-19 pandemic, of course, along with the other sectors. So the urgent action, I think, is needed to reunite the energy sector to reboot our national economies as part of the COVID-19 response. So I think our attempt to accelerate the uptake of the cleaner and the low carbon energies, along with technologies, as Deputy Secretary just mentioned, with, of course, market stability with a sufficient supply, will boost economic growth and brings, socio-economic benefit. For example, job creation, and also income generation back to the new normal of the energy future. And of course, definitely, as we heard, we need stimulus and recovery packages. It's important that they focus on clean energy transition and technologies as part of these packages, focusing on energy system that I think is cleaner, more secure, resilient, and cost-effective. So with that today, based on the current Korea government's Green New Deal that we heard from Excellency Ambassador this morning, we're going to hear, our three expert speakers who are going to share the views and experiences on the policy and practices in order to achieve the net zero emission and to accelerate the energy transition toward decarbonization and green economy. So with that, may I introduce the three speakers as follows. The first speaker is Dr. Zulfikar Junaidy. Now, Dr. Zulfikar is a senior officer of the Sustainable Energy, Renewable Energy, and Energy Efficiency of the ASEAN Center for Energy. The second speaker is Professor Chung Suk-yong. Professor Chung is a professor of Division of International Studies of the Korea University and also in many positions in his career on the green energies and green sustainability. And the last one, the third one is Dr. Chung Sung Sam. Dr. Chung is a research fellow of the Korea Energy Economic Institute, or KEI. So with that, may I start the first speaker first, Dr. Zulfikar. Dr. Zulfikar will share with us, the topic on the ASEAN effort for the green recovery and energy transition. So with that, the floor is yours, Dr. Suniga. Dr. Suniga, please.
Dr. Virawat, may I check that you can hear my voice clearly?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, thank you for the opportunity for today in this third NSP forum. My name is Zulfikar, and I'm from ASEAN Center for Energy. So today, in the behalf of the ASEAN Center for Energy, please allow me to share with you the ASEAN's effort for green recovery and energy transition. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. So as mentioned before by our speakers and our welcoming remarks, I would like to start with the introduction of our institution. So ASEAN Center for Energy is the representative of 10 ASEAN member states in the energy sectors. Previous slide, please, the first slide. Yeah, so we actually has a role as a think tank, catalyst, and knowledge hub in the regions, and we are currently hosted by the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources of Indonesia. And mainly, we work as the implementing agency of the regional blueprint, which is the ASEAN Plan of Action on Energy Cooperation, or APAEC. Next slide, please. Explain to you. So I will just briefly about the can I have the next slide, please, on the APAEC? Yeah, thank you very much. So one thing that I would like to emphasize in this APAEC Phase 2, 2021-2025, is its energy transition focus. So as mentioned, as you can be seen in here, actually our APAEC first phase, 2016-2020, has the theme of enhancing energy connectivity and market integration in ASEAN. So this is in line with the ASEAN Economic Cooperation Community Blueprint. And basically, we would like to achieve what we call the energy security, accessibility, affordability, and sustainability. And for the second phase, we are emphasizing this notion of energy transition and also the strengthening of energy resilience through the innovation and cooperation in the region, but also with our partners, including the Republic of Korea. And I would like also to note that there are 7 program areas in the APAEC, and I tried to highlight it in green, the topics that are totally related with the energy transition. For example, through the ASEAN Power Grid, we plan to promote the clean and renewable energy integration and the ideas of climate change, both in the mitigation but also the adaptation, has been very, very prevalent, especially also in the grid resiliency. We also have the clean coal technology for transition, but mostly we are going to work on the energy efficiency and conservation, as well as renewable energy, among the other program area, we can see that these two program area have the most specific targets, which are to reduce the energy intensity by 32% by 2025, and also to increase the share of renewable energy to 23% of total primary energy supply by 2025, and also 35% installed power capacity. So these two targets will be very important in achieving the energy transition and green growth development in the region. Next slide, please. Yes, so for the energy efficiency and conservations, I'm just going to brief deeply. We have five strategies here and 14 action plans that are expanded among building, which includes residential and commercial, transport, and also industry. And the strategies that we have in here is in more on increasing the standards labeling, but also in enhancing the participation of private sector, financial institutions, and related cluster. Next slide, please. As for the renewable energy, we have various activities. Noting the situation in the country, we have like specific activities for biofuel and bioenergy, but we also want to push forward more on the renewable energy R&D, on the high-level policy dialogue on renewable energy, the decarbonization pathway through renewable energy, as well as the RE information and training center. So I do believe these two will be some of the potential activities in pursuing both the energy transition, but also green growth in the region. Next slide, please. Please allow me as well to share with you some of the results from our flagship study, which is the 6th ASEAN Energy Outlook, the biannually energy outlook produced by ACE in cooperations and strong collaboration of the ASEAN member states. So this is basically designed to complement the APIC Phase 2 to understand what would be the pathways in achieving the regional energy targets. So in the left, we are shown that the energy demand and energy supply in the region will be ever increasing, as shown in the right. We have a strong increase of 2.46 times of increase from 2005 to 2040 based on our outlook. But if you see on the left, we also designed several scenarios, which are the first, the ASEAN National Target Scenario, or the ATS, but also the APS, which is the ASEAN APIC target scenarios. And we see that the first thing that happened here is the total energy will be decreasing, meaning that the impact of energy efficiency will be very, very important to the region. And also we can see that the impact of the increasing of renewable energy will be imminent as well. Can we go to the next slide, please? And a snapshot of the SDG 7 progress in the regions, the energy-related SDGs. For the electrification, we are mostly on target. We believe that within very soon, 100% of renewable electrification can be achieved. We have some challenges in few countries, but most countries have already electrified. Challenges, though, is still there in the clean cooking. So I think I would like to bring this issue as well. And there are various challenges, mostly in the incentives for people to really move from the traditional biomass to the more modern energy of clean cooking. For renewable energy and energy efficiency, we are having quite good progress, especially in energy efficiency. But of course, there are huge homework that needs to be done for us to at least achieve the regional APIC target of RE and energy efficiency. Next slide, please. So the key result of our study is that when we are trying to pursue decarbonization, when we are moving from the baseline scenario to the national target and then to the APIC target scenario, what we see in this graph in the left is the difference between the emissions from the baseline to the ATS, and the right is the difference between the ATS with the stronger APS. And we see that the contributions, the reduce of emissions from each sector in here, the power sector, the electricity generation, the transport, and the industrial sector will be the most important sectors if you want to pursue decarbonization and green growth in the region. Next slide, please. So let me move on with the pandemic effects. So this is based on our study about the COVID-19 versus energy sectors in the ASEAN. What we see happen in 2019 and moving on to 2020 is that there are multiplier effects of the energy coming from the pandemic. First, we have the fall of electricity demand, of course, and related as well with the moving restriction. We have also reductions in transportation sector, especially when the so-called lockdown is happening in the countries. And because of that, profit loss from the electricity, but also other companies. There is an increase in vulnerable groups, and this means that the subsidy and stimulus package needs to be done and sent to the people that are vulnerable due to the pandemic. And because of that, are more loss as well in the income from the electricity as well as energy companies in the regions. Can I go to the next slide, please? So moving away from the electricity itself, we see that basically in the renewable energy, they have a lot of impacts due to the delay of power plants development, but also but also we see that the renewable energy has a very strong impact, meaning that it's compared to other renewable energy, we see that the renewable energy becomes more resilient compared to others, and its activities will be very important for the countries to build back better in 2021 and moving forward. Can I have the next slide, please? So as I mentioned before, renewable energy is found to be more resilient, although they have disrupted in the supply chain in the beginning. But we see that there are a lot of projects can still continue. We see that the solar revolution in the Vietnam, as well as other cases to support this hypothesis. Can I have the next slide, please? So now I would like to bring all of those energy transitions into what we can do in the regions, as mentioned by our DSG, that we are currently have this ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, and as mentioned by His Excellency Ambassador Lim, there is also connections with the GreenODA coming from the Korea. So the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework here have 5 strategies, and including the digital market integrations, human security, health system. But what I would like to highlight in here is also in how we can use this moment to move towards a more sustainable and resilient future. And including in that is disaster management, but also in the terms of the energy transitions. As we know, as mentioned before, that energy is the highest contributor for the climate change in the region. So if I get the next slide, please. But this is based on one of the studies that coming from the ASEAN. So it tried to map the green elements in the nation's economic stimulus. And what we've seen actually in the nations, there are still a lot more focus in the saving life and livelihoods, especially as you've known, the second, the third, fourth wave of the pandemic is coming back again. So the focus on the economic incentive is still very strong. And within the stimulus and recovery, we have some green components related to energy efficiency or clean transportations, agriculture, biodiversity, and also disaster prevention management system. But for some, it still can be not really environmentally friendly because it's more focused on moving the economy. And there are still a lot of opportunities moving forward, so that we can design this economic recovery through budgeting, regulations, investment, incentives, etc., to promote more on long-term sustainable. So what I'm currently thinking is that the stimulus packages can be introduced with innovative strategies. Later on, our colleagues will explain some option of this, but I'm thinking something similar to result-based payment, like when we provide incentive, but giving a chance for example, we can give a recovery fund to electricity, but they have to build more renewable energy, for example. And the last is, I think we really need to use the ACRF to be more downscaled, go to the countries, and to leverage to really support the greater national economic recovery. So next slide, please. This is my last 2 slides. So this is just the food for thoughts for escalating energy transition, especially in this post-pandemic recovery and this green growth possibility. But first, we have to focus on the socioeconomics. The approaches need to be people-centered and localized to understand and adapt it with the socioeconomic concerns and incentives in the regions. What's the impact to the job creations? What's the impact to recovery will be very important. The second is we have to have this stakeholders involvement. So the science, business, policy community. By community, I would like to mention that this is local, but also international community, including international partners, that needs to focus on the innovations, both in technology, but also innovation in the financing. And I also want to show that climate change issues are among all the sectors. So it's not only in energy, not only environment, but also transport, financing, economic, etc. And the last, as I mentioned before, countries are currently trying to balance on COVID-19 recovery, focusing on the economic, but also we need to really introduce how to introduce the sustainability issues so that this moment does not lost and we can build back better and have the long-term vision of sustainability within the economic recovery. Do I have the next slide? Oh yeah, I think I'll just quickly. So this is one of the projects of ASEAN Center for Energy, the ASEAN Climate Change and Energy projects, which we try to break the silo between energy and climate. We have several activities, and we see this as one of the contributions that we can do in a way of pursuing both the energy transitions, but also the green recovery and sustainability climate-friendly system in the regions. Next slide, please. This will be my last slide. I think that will be all from me. Thank you very much for the time. Back to Dr. Virawat. I'm open for any questions. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much indeed, Dr. Sufika. Very comprehensive presentation that we can see the whole picture of ASEAN from you. You mentioned about the ASEAN energy outlook, the current one. That's very interesting, and I think all AMS or ASEAN member states already recognize this one, acknowledge this one at the high level already. You mentioned about decarbonization in each sector, and then of course the area of improvement. Especially you focus on the ASEAN comprehensive recovery, framework, and then recovery package. Actually, I have some question for you, but however, I would like to put like this. I like to let all experts, to complete their presentation first. The other two coming up, then we come up with quite a bit altogether, once and for all. Question is okay? Yeah, question will be coming soon for you. Thank you so much, Dr. Sufika. Now, let me move to our dear colleague, an expert from Korea, Professor Chung Soo-young. Dr. Chung will, tell us about the Green New Deal of the Korea and the ASEAN, especially the ASEAN-Korea cooperation in climate change, exactly as what Ambassador, Excellency Ambassador mentioned this morning. So we're going to hear from Dr. Chung. Dr. Chung, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. His Excellency Ambassador Lim, and then our moderator, and then the participants, and ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure and privilege actually to have a chance to talk about ROK's Green New Deal and ASEAN ROK cooperation climate change in this very important venue. Next slide, please. So let me just start with talking about the new southern policy of the Republic of Korea. As you can see that the ASEAN region has remained as one of the very important strategic regions for every aspect of the Korean foreign policy. And then we can see that there are 7 initiatives, and which includes something about the climate change. Especially climate change issues has become important in the context of new southern policy because of the not only a response to climate change, also as my previous speaker just mentioned, that dealing with the post-COVID-19 recovery plans. So in these 2 regards, that new southern policy of Republic of Korea can play a very good platform as to strengthen the cooperation between the Republic of Korea and ASEAN, thereby not only enhancing the capability of the ASEAN countries to address climate change, but also making the good contributions to global efforts to address the climate change, also bringing the post-COVID-19 recovery plans at the global level. Next slide, please. Okay, so next one is that you might wonder how has been the Korea's policy on climate change. Actually, Korea's climate change policy has been very consistent. I would say starting with the Lee Myung-bak administration back to the 2008 when the President Lee announced the low carbon green growth policy, and the next President Park Geun-hye emphasized the importance of creative economy, where we emphasize the low carbon technologies to address climate change. Now, under the Moon Jae-in administration, as many of you know that the Moon Jae-in administration has emphasized the importance of energy transition policy, Also these days, Green New Deal policy, carbon neutral policies. In other words, that Korea's climate change policy has been very consistent and has been only expanded to cover various aspects of not only the environment, but also economic, foreign policy, technology, creating jobs, every aspect of the society as a whole. Next slide, please. In that sense, coming to the Moon Jae-in administration's policy, as I just said, that the energy transition policy triggered somehow Green New Deal policy, as Ambassador Lim just mentioned last year by the President Moon. And then also it has further continued to focus on the carbon neutral policy that was announced at the end of last year by the President. Next slide, please. So now, what are some of the details of the Korea's carbon neutral policy? And then Korean government actually identified 10 focused areas of this carbon neutral policy. As you can see, which includes the accelerating energy transition, transformation of industry toward the carbon neutral society, future mobility, promotion of future low carbon industry, green economy ecosystem for startups, circular economy, and public awareness, just the transition, local community-based approach, and low carbon cities and ocean and land use. In other words, it's very comprehensive. As my colleagues in ASEAN might have recognized that, oh, there are already many potential areas of cooperation between the Republic of Korea and ASEAN. Let's go to the next slide, please. And then here, from the different angle, eventually, if we are interested in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and then ultimately the solution will lie in what kind of low carbon technologies that you have. In the sense that Korea identified 10 focused technologies for Korea's carbon neutral policy by the Ministry of Science and ICT, which includes solar and wind technology, hydrogen, bioenergy, advanced industrial process, low carbon transportation, digital, CCUS, building efficiency, low carbon petrochemistry, and low carbon steel and cement. So as you can see that these can be another set of the engine of growth for Republic of Korea. And I'm sure that in this venue, we can discuss about how these strengths that Korea have can be shared with countries in ASEAN region. Let's go to the next slide, please. In that sense, let us think about what is the logical or policy level of the framework of the building cooperation between the Republic of Korea and ASEAN. And in the sense that we are talking about now the climate change. Every issue about the climate change needs to be studied, to be discussed from the Paris Agreement. And then, as you may know, that the Paris Agreement asked every country, including ASEAN countries and Republic of Korea, to develop its NDC, nationally determined contributions, and submitted it to the UNFCCC on the regular basis. So under this framework, every country has developed their targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then to achieve this target, as I said, details about how to promote the 10 technologies, for instance, what are the focused areas for the specific country. In case of Korea, I shared the 10 focused areas can be developed. So here, what Korea's emission target has been recently updated. This is the most updated, framework of the reducing greenhouse gas emissions by Korea. Korea NDC says now that 24.4% reduction relative to by the 2030 from the level of the greenhouse gas emissions in 2017. And here, as I emphasized in the red color, you can see some interesting aspects for Korea's NDC. As you can see, some of the carbon reduction needs to be done by using international cooperation. It is specifically mentioned in the Korean NDC. So in other words, plan to use a voluntary cooperation under the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which includes LULUCF, another 40 sector, and some others as well. So in the sense that the technical level, if we utilize the very good sense of implementing Article 6, that can be a good basis for cooperation with the developing countries, especially ASEAN. In other words, Korea and the ASEAN used to work together to address climate change already, I would say. And then by putting this mechanism into our cooperative efforts, we can further systemize the cooperation by sharing the good outcomes together, also demonstrating good outcomes to the entire world. So there are good frameworks available under the Paris Agreement, and I do hope that Korea and ASEAN will find a way of how to use this platform for better addressing climate change together. Next slide, please. So in that sense, how to make a cooperation between two regions and country and region is, we can find one good item in the context of Korea's GreenODA. Ambassador Lim already mentioned about the Korea's GreenODA policy in general, and then this is the further elaboration of what is emphasized about the GreenODA. Korea's GreenODA can be understood in the context of the several elements, including Green New Deal policy. I don't need to explain about Green New Deal policy more. Net zero policy, that's a carbon neutral policy of Republic of Korea. And as I said, that there is something important element that we can use. That's Article 6 of the Paris Agreement mechanism. Also, as you can see, Korea has two focused regional policies, including New Southern Policy. In other words, New Southern Policy can be an integral part or possibly central part of implementing Korean GreenODA. It's not just a matter of focusing on the region of the world to Korea. It's the focused area in terms of implementing Korea's GreenODA. In the sense that there are several ways of developing Korean GreenODA policies with ASEAN countries, including climate change related issues per se. And then as we can see, not only in Korea, also European Green Deal, that the circular economy needs to go hand in hand with dealing with the climate change issues. And then more importantly, project activity support, readiness activities, capacity building, raising public awareness. This component must come together with developing and implementing focused areas of the implementation to address climate change. So I would say there are three windows that we can use to implement the Korea's GreenODA policy with ASEAN. Let's go to the next slide, please. In that sense, I'd like to talk about what are the general areas of cooperation available at this time. And then as some of you already mentioned, that the forest sector has been very important. Some countries in ASEAN regions that some countries were active in addressing forest sector. And then marine environment, South Asian countries have a long line of coastal lines, and then sharing the very important areas of the ocean in the world. So there are already several cooperative mechanisms available. Also, there are some important sectors available. We can talk about it. And then I don't need to talk about the Article 6 issues. One more, in addition to what I just said, is that Article 6 is not just a matter of the market mechanism per se. It can be used as a new window of climate finance. Already, my previous speaker mentioned that climate finance is very, very critical in implementing the South Asian countries' policy to address climate change. And then Article 6, once again, can be a very good window to secure good, sufficient finance resources from various sectors. And of course, early warning, disaster risk reduction cannot be excluded in the context cooperation with ASEAN in general. Let's go to the next slide, please. And then I know today's focus is about energy transition. In the sense that I want to elaborate a little bit more about how we can talk about the cooperation between Republic of Korea and ASEAN in the context of energy. And then I provided the subtitle, that's a framework of climate change cooperation agreement of Republic of Korea. This is something that has been developed by Minister of Foreign Affairs of Republic of Korea to promote the bilateral or multilateral cooperation between the Korea and other countries, developing countries, or like the regions such as ASEAN, in the context of using Article 6 mechanisms. We have not yet one single concrete example yet, but I know that it will come soon. And then I do hope that ASEAN region will take advantage to using this actually framework to strengthen cooperation between Republic of Korea and ASEAN, especially in energy sector. To do so, I identified the two different tracks. The first was energy sector needs to be identified between the Republic of Korea and ASEAN. We already saw some of the focused areas of the energy sector in ASEAN by my previous speaker, and I show that I listed some of the focused areas by Republic of Korea in energy sector. There are some overlapping areas. We also need to see each country's NDCs as well, and there is also a process to identify which sector in energy in general we can work together. And then, maybe we can generate some corporate activity in this sector. However, in the end, in order to ensure the tangible outcomes of implementing policies, it's extremely difficult and more important to build the policy and legal infrastructure. Here, I would suggest that maybe Republic of Korea and the ASEAN can work together to deal with issues on Article 6 issues, also transparency requirement. Transparency requirement is a term that is available under the Paris Agreement. It's what we call as MRV, measuring, reporting, verification of the greenhouse gas emissions. These two issues can be a very good platform actually to enhance the capability of each government in the ASEAN region to strengthen the focus, strengthen cooperation between the Republic of Korea and ASEAN in selected energy sectors. So these two issues must come together. Next slide, please. To do so, I was thinking about what are the immediately available possible cooperation, maybe between the community that I'm associated with in Korea, also the community in ASEAN who are in this webinar today. So I identified 4 different activities. First one is I call tentatively that Korea ASEAN Climate Change Forum 1. Here, Forum 1 needs to be done and can be implemented in ASEAN region in terms of by providing short-term workshops and training programs for enhancing capacity for government policymakers, experts, and possibly some other civil society leaders, and then depending on the situation and interest. And then second one is that we can invite government officers and experts in the ASEAN region to Korea, and then we can provide some of the very well organized short-term training services, not only talking about some of the policies and other experience in the meeting rooms. Also, we can arrange the field trips actually to the relevant sites in Korea. These two activities can be done together, or in the meantime, we can identify the more urgent one, either in ASEAN or in Korea, and then we can go to the next activity later. And third one is that I firmly believe that eventually GreenODA needs to be implemented by providing and developing a implementation framework, building a knowledge platform in the host country. Do you know what? What is the most important driving force that has made Korea successful from one of the poorest countries in the world to a very advanced country now? That's knowledge development. Korea aspired, establishing the think tanks and then developing very advanced universities, and then nurturing the future leaders in the knowledge sector. And then therefore, every cooperation, I do hope, between the Republic of Korea and ASEAN needs to go together with the developing high education development program. My team already had experiences in everything here that I listed, and I already observed how important it is for the best benefits of host countries, in this case, ASEAN region. And then finally, these three things are more like institutional, and then knowledge-based platforms. Eventually, all these good institutional frameworks and enhanced capabilities and the advanced knowledge set needs to be used to develop and implement real projects. In the sense that, depending on the cases, depending on the needs, depending on the situation, maybe we can develop the joint development of a project proposal that can be submitted either to, say, KOICA, like a Korean ODA agency, or Green Climate Fund, or ADB for a larger scale of the project later on. For instance, my team helped one country in Africa based on the 3-year capacity building project funded by KOICA. We further developed a $12 million project that is to be implemented by the Global Green Growth Institute from this year for 5 years. And that it has become one of the key projects, not only for the governments of that country in Africa, but also international organizations and some other related stakeholders. In the sense that, for instance, my university, Korea University, together with the CS Lab, this non-profit think tank that is guided by some high-level former government officers. For instance, a former Vice Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Shin Gak-soo, and some others. And we have worked together with the Global Green Growth Institute, UNDP, Asia Euro Foundation, and of course, the Korean government and the UNOSD. We have already a track record in implementing the good ideas, also generating good impacts to the society. Maybe if necessary, we can discuss about the possible collaboration and cooperation in ASEAN region as well. Next slide, please. So that's the end of my presentation. If you want to know more about my organizations, I provided websites of the 2 organizations that I direct, and I do hope that my presentation help the colleagues in ASEAN to better understand the Korean policy, also potential opportunities available for the participants in this webinar today. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much indeed, Professor Chung. Very, very excellent and cooperative presentation to all of us. I think you have shown clearly that the Korea initiative on the Green New Deal, on the net zero ambition under your President Moon is quite clear. And I think I think Korea is going to be a very, very possible good model for AMS or ASEAN member states, definitely. As long as we have the same goal, right? The goal of carbon neutrality, the goal of net zero, and the goal of decarbonization, and so on. So we are on the same part. You mentioned nicely on the clean, what you call it, Korea GreenODA, right? This kind of thing, maybe we can discuss further on. Quite interesting on the official development assistance that you designed it to cover all spectrum of the cooperation. Interesting indeed. And I'm sure that it's going to be very, very green indeed on this kind of strategy. And also one thing that I come up to my mind is you mentioned about the green finance. I think this is a big enabler to make policy to action. So we can discuss more. And of course, you mentioned about the 10 key technologies, also interesting. So with that, like I said, we're going to come back to you on the question later on after we hear Dr. Sung Sam presentation. Is that all right? Okay. We come back to you with Q&A after this.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. So now, without any further ado, may I move immediately to Dr. Sung Sam. Dr. Chung from KI will talk about Green New Deal in another sense and ASEAN Korea Energy Cooperation. Then the floor is yours. Dr. Chung, please.
So
Yes,
can you hear me now?
very clear.
Okay, sounds good. So good afternoon. This is Sung Sam Chung, head of Energy Cooperation Research Team at Korean Energy Economic Institute. It's an honor for me to have a chance to present at today's third NSFP forum. My presentation topic is RK's Green New Deal and ASEAN RK Energy Cooperation. Next slide, please. Yeah, it consists of 4 chapters. And next slide, please. The first is about current status of Korea's energy cooperation with Asian countries. Next slide. Yeah, the Asean is a very important partner for Korea because we import major energy resources from the region, and at the same time, our energy companies export energy plants to the region. So this graph shows that Korea's energy trade status with Asean from 2016 to 2019. The Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei account for a significant portion of LNG and coal import of Korea. However, the proportion of these 3 countries is somewhat decreasing due to the diversification of import lines, considering energy security and increased domestic consumption of 3 countries and decreased production volume. So Korea imported 32 million tons of bituminous coal from Indonesia, about 25% of total imports in 2018. And in the case of crude oil, imports from the top 3 countries amounted to about 50 million barrels in 2018, but it accounting for only about 1% of total imports. The right side shows Korea's export to ASEAN. Because of the amount of energy resources imported from ASEAN is too large, the trade imbalance between Korea and ASEAN in energy sector also is large. However, with Korea's recent export increase of energy part to the region, it is gradually easing. The main export products are silicon, panel, batteries, and etc. Next slide, please. Yeah, this slide shows Korea's energy materials and part export to the ASEAN in more detail, but I would like to skip this slide. So next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, thank you. And this graph shows the number of power generation projects in ASEAN carried out by 5 major countries, Korea, China, Japan, and US and Germany between 2016 to 2018. A total 111 projects, the plus 3 countries carried out 82 projects, nearly 80% of total project. And Japan has the highest portion with 37 projects. And coal power generation accounts for nearly half of 82 of plus 3 countries. And in Japan and Korea, it accounts for more than half of total power generation project. Next slide. And the next is why we have to enhance the energy cooperation between RK and ASEAN. Next slide. So until just a few years ago, the energy access or the universal access had been a major issue in energy cooperation, especially with developing countries. According to the IEA, as of 2018, still there are 860 million people living without access to electricity. However, as presented previously by Dr. Yunardi, the SDG 7.1.1, the universal access to the electricity in Asia is getting improved very rapidly. So IEA says that around 80% of the 800 million people who gain access to electricity between 2010 and 2018 were in developing Asia. The next slide, please. So the primary reason for the recent emphasis on energy cooperation is mainly due to the climate crisis. New analysis from Oxfam based on the research by the Swiss Re Institute apparently shows that developing countries are much more vulnerable from climate crisis. They say that without more ambitious climate action, G7 countries could lose 8.5% of their GDP by 2050. I think that's the error per year. It's not per year. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. So until by 2050, the GDP decreased by 8.5%. And by the way, the Swiss research says that in developing countries, the damage caused by climate change is even worse. In Malaysia, the most vulnerable country, is expected to suffer the huge GDP decrease by 36.3%. And Singapore and Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, yeah, all of their GDP decrease in over than 30%. And according to recently released the IEA report titled Net Zero by 2050, a roadmap for the global energy sector, it says that in advanced economies, CO2 emissions declined by about a third between 2020 and 2050. However, it would be offset by the increase in emerging and developed countries. The report says that because of increased population, brisk economic growth, urbanization, and the expansion of infrastructure, the energy demand in emerging and developing countries continues to grow strongly by around 20% until the mid of 2040s. Likewise, the CO2 emission also grow by about almost 20%. So in overall, the global energy-related CO2 emissions would be plateau until 2050. And Global Outlook on Financing for Sustainable Development 2021, published by OECD last year, it says that because of COVID-19, the financing gap increased by 70% from $2.5 trillion to $4.2 trillion. Of course, this gap is not caused by climate crisis, but COVID-19. However, from the above Oxfam report, we can infer that much of this financing gap would be related to climate crisis. So next slide, please. So next two slides shows leading countries, the US and UK's and MDB's, World Bank ADB's support plan for developing countries' climate actions. I would like to skip this one. Yeah, the next slide. Yeah, so let's move on to the Korea's Green New Deal. Yeah, thank you. So as you already might know, the Green New Deal is one of two pillars of Korean New Deal, Digital New Deal and Green New Deal. The purpose of Green New Deal is to accelerate transition toward a low carbon and eco-friendly economy. And there are 10 key projects, 3 for Digital New Deal and 3 for Green New Deals and 4 for both Digital and Green New Deals. And next slide, please. Yeah. At first, when it was announced last year, the scope of the policy was mostly limited to the domestic issues, such as job creation, structural transformation of economy, and inclusive society, etc. By the way, the scope has been expanded to increase an international agenda. For example, in 2021 International Economic Strategy, established in January 2021, expanding the green initiative by $100 million is stated as one of the 10 major goals, and eco-friendly energy is one of the 4 major cooperation fields with developing countries. And on January, another strategy was announced. That's the K-New Deal Globalization Strategy. This strategy consists of 2 sub-strategies. One is for digital and the other is for green. And proposed goals of Green New Deal globalization strategies include increasing the share of Green New Deal ODA from 6.44% to 22.7%, and expanding power generation project focused on green from 15 gigawatt to 30 gigawatt, and providing export financing worth 30 trillion won by 2025. And this is for both digital and green. And next slide. No, yeah. And please back to the previous slide. Yeah, thank you. And his opening remarks at the P4G Seoul Summit held in May 30, President Moon declares that Korea will assist the energy transition of some developing countries that are heavily reliant on coal for power. And next slide, please. Yeah. And very recently, about 2 weeks ago, Green New Deal ODA strategy was established as a detailed strategy to achieve the goal President Moon announced at the P4G Seoul Summit. Actually, before Green New Deal ODA strategy came out last May, Green EDCF strategy also was established by Ministry of Economy and Finance. And in March, Ministry of Foreign Affairs also established similar Green New Deal grant aid strategies. Next slide, please. However, despite the successive ODA strategies which aim to expand the green sectors, still the proportion of energy project, the main sector of green, it only accounts for 6.3% among all approved ODA projects in 2022. Next slide, please. So next question is, how can we expand the energy cooperation through Green New Deal ODA? Of course, there will be a number of variable and practical measures suggested in previous strategies, but today I would like to point out 3 among them. The first one is intensify or increase the share of climate mitigation projects, such as renewable energy, energy efficiency, and other technologies such as CCUS, ESS, and hydrogen. Those are direct and powerful countermeasures against the climate crisis. And next slide, please. The second is to internalize climate change through energy conversions. This graph shows the interaction between SDG 7 and the other SDGs. And we can find that SDG 7 works as an enabling factor for the achievement of other SDGs. And actually it is true. For example, better inclusion of energy in school curricula, say PC, tablet, OHP, and many other electric devices may foster better education quality. Likewise, with using refrigerator and electrical equipment, the impact of a healthcare project might be improved. Thus, it is essential to develop green energy-related projects based on recipient countries' actual need. Next slide, please. And the third one is about financing. In the previous presentation, the importance of the financing was pointed out, and I also want to express one more time. The financing gap is one of the top issues that should be solved for enhancing energy cooperation between Korea and Asean. And here's one interesting finance model which was proposed in Green EDCF strategy, the loan grant conversion model. So let's take a look at the diagram on the left side first. For a traditional EDCF project, there are 2 stakeholders. The EDCF has a loan donor and the recipient countries. By the way, in this financial model, there is another stakeholders. There's an error. It's not a grant. It's a grant agency. And at the first step, the grant agency and EDCF make a negotiation regarding loan conversion. For example, let's take a simple healthcare project cases, which aims to lower mortality rate. Then these 2 agents can set mortality decreases target, say 10% the decrease of the mortality rate. And then if the target is achieved through the project, EDCF project, then some of the loan which is predetermined by grant agency and EDCF, would be replaced with grant. So basically, this loan conversion model is one type of result-based payment model, which is known to induce better performance by giving incentives related with outcomes. So this finance model is very conceptual so far, but however, I believe it also, it absolutely could be a good solution to fill out the financing gap. Next slide. Yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Chung. Thank you very much indeed. Very comprehensive presentation one more time. I think KI is kind of sort of a key partner of ASEAN, right? I think your presentation also show clearly that your effort, to intensify cooperation to ASEAN is quite clear. And you show your country's, energy product quite interesting that you import and you export some technology, as Deputy Secretary mentioned, not only renewable alone, but I think technologies or alternate technologies, advanced technology, going to be, part of the enabler to move toward the climate change. You mentioned about the, interesting thing that you talk about the finance, and then what you call the loan conversion model. You convert loan to grant. I think this is quite interesting if you talk about it more in our Q&A. So with that, I'd like to perhaps start the Q&A right now, if you allow, because the time is quite limited now. So one more time, thank you very much for the three speakers, sir. Then I'd like to start, the Q&A first with Dr. Sufika first. Dr. Sufika. Well, Dr. Sufika, as you know well that it's been noted that the national green components of economic recovery that you mentioned perhaps may show somewhat lacking. So in your opinion, what are really lacking, and what are the priority needs of the country, especially when we have to work closely with between ASEAN and Korea? And my second point is, how do you see energy transition progress during the COVID-19 pandemic? What is its potential to accelerate the post-pandemic recovery, as you mentioned in your presentation? So who's gonna be the main key player, and how Korea-ASEAN cooperation can help? So this is 2 points for you, Dr. Sufika, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Virawat, for the very interesting and challenging question. So I think I will try to answer the first one. I think the issues in having this green recovery for the countries is that, as we know, currently the pandemic is still not away yet. So I think the countries have been very cautious in putting spending or stimulus that is more mid to long term. So they are more really focused on the health, as you know, on the for the livelihood subsidy for energy use, for electricity and others. So basically the focus is still there. And I think what can be done, hopefully from our partners such as Korea, is to really put some kind of suggestions, or probably like recommendations, some kind of evidence-based policy recommendations, for example, that like nothing from the Korean experience, pushing for this green development can actually help the economic recovery, both in the short term but also in the long term. Or recommendations that we actually can really balance this economic recovery with the long-term sustainability. Like, for example, we can give some kind of incentive for the industry sector, for example, but the incentive is attached with some kind of requirement to install renewable energy to apply energy efficiency. So I think the policy-wise, the incentive is required, but it should be like evidence-based. It really should and make the governments in the ASEAN really believe that it should work. And another thing is probably some kind of more like investment related that really shows that the partners really are supportive in the countries in developing their economic sustainably. As I mentioned before, the socioeconomics people-centered approaches is very important. So if it can be shown that this green recovery can really create job creations, it can really impact the SMEs. I mean, not only in the big company, but also in the SMEs, the people, the youth. I think it would be more helpful for the countries to really implement this green recovery. And to answer the second question, I think the renewable energy, as mentioned before, actually showed some promise in this COVID-19. So I think, as you know, compared to others, renewable energy seems to be more resilient, partly yes. Because the government actually, some government actually push the renewable energy quite a lot, like in Vietnam and others. Like for example, in Myanmar, they have this solar auction that even though it's a pandemic, they actually have some specific exclusions that for people from abroad to submit the documents for the bidding for the solar in there. So I think the policies are in support for the renewable, but it's not all, and it's not at the level to really to cover the fossil fuels in the country. So I think, and again, back to my first point, noting that the priority currently is to, how can I say, is to develop the economy. So I think the business as usual, like for example, people pushing to have transport, people pushing to have more economic activity, which in the end will use energy, which is currently in the region is, the fact is in the region is still fossil fuel based. So I think this can be a challenge for the renewable energy development in the future. So I think, but the opportunity is there, but the challenge of pandemic is still very strong. So the question is how we can move forward with the proper policy. So I think the key stakeholders in here will be, I don't think there is one specific stakeholder here. I think it should be, like, as I mentioned, like multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholders. So I think from the national level, the ministries of energy, ministry of environment, economic, they need to really develop the policy together. So there should be like one concerted action. But as a region, I also would like to note the importance of having these local or regional institutions that really knows the conditions of the countries, meaning that any kind of like ODA, any kind of investment or cooperation between countries should really involve the local and regional stakeholders. So it should be like both ways. I mean, they should really listen to what the country, but at the same time, they should really bring the best practices so that the countries really make the actions as their own, not something coming from outside. I think that would be the important thing to pursue. Thank you, Dr. Virawat.
So you mentioned about perhaps we have to look around all dimensions, right? Like you mentioned about the people-oriented or people-centered. Perhaps you also imply the private sector role, right, in terms of the how to balance the green growth with the economic development, particularly during the pandemic. Okay, thank you so much for your good point. Professor Chung, maybe I turn to you. This we heard a very interesting, policy of Korea, and I'm also sure that the lesson learned from your country's climate action, can be very beneficial to ASEAN member countries. Anyway, what would be the lesson learned that your countries can perhaps giving to our countries, and how ASEAN country can pursue similar action, and what would be the challenges? My first point. And the second point is that perhaps you can emphasize again when the Excellency Ambassador mentioned about the government funding toward ASEAN cooperation, a bit more on that, so that we can see the kind of possibility of the green finance or green funding that can help activity of ASEAN to move on. Yes, there are 2 points. Professor Chung.
Thank you. Regarding the first point, whenever I have a chance to meet any leaders in developing countries regarding that issue, this is my usual question. So do you have a highest level of political will in your country to pursue actually these efforts? I think the reason why Korea has been very successful in addressing climate change is because, as I showed you, we secured the highest level of interest by the head of the government. I think that's very, very important. Of course, to do so, he or herself, needs to have that vision. If not, then we can assist actually head of the governments to realize the importance of addressing climate change. That's number one. Number two, what are the another lessons that we can share for our colleagues in ASEAN region is that when you design the climate change policy, you need to develop the indication to general public that it's not a matter of the cost, but it's a matter of the opportunities. How many jobs we can create based on the what kind of focused technologies that we can identify together, how this technology can generate the economic growth in a sustainable way. Okay, I think that requires very important one. Also, as my previous speaker said, that involving necessary local stakeholders. It could be civil society organizations, it could be universities, it could be cities, and depending on the situation of your region, I think involving necessary stakeholders. Eventually, as I emphasized in my presentation, all these things needs to be done by developing good policy and institutional infrastructure of the country, which has been developed by reflecting the specific situation of that country. And then I think we can make similar or better story in ASEAN region than in Korea, I would say. Well, regarding the second question, this is a very broad and general question. I don't know how to address that question in a very limited manner. But I would say, based on some of the experiences that I shared, whenever I would like to work together with developing country colleagues, what my team usually do is that we take a look at NDC of the country, because this is the national basic plan to address climate change. If NDC is good enough to identify what kind of specific sectors or specific actors can be developed in cooperation with, say, Republic of Korea, then maybe we can go to that level. If not, then from the beginning, maybe we need to discuss about how to enhance the NDC of your country or your region as a whole, so that we can identify, once again, very good sector that we can work together, and these sectors can be a leading sectors actually to make a synergies in another sectors of the region over the countries as a whole. So to do so, of course, we also need to talk about what is the current status and the specific strategies of Korea GreenODA policy. To do so, of course, it's also important for us to get involved very good people from Korea who do understand the general policies of GreenODA of Korea. Also, those who are willing to working together with colleagues in ASEAN region. So two-way combination and cooperation is necessary if we are all interested in maximizing the benefits of the Korea's GreenODA in ASEAN region.
Thank you so much. I think you mean that ASEAN can I would say optimize the Korean GreenODA, toward the energy transition or green recovery, that to make sure that it fully adopt the green target, right? For example, as you mentioned, as you hear from Dr. Suniga this morning, we have to be in line with our APAIC, right? ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation, Phase 2, particularly, and also the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework. So that is a good news that we can optimize your GreenODA definitely to the prioritization of the sector, to the capacity building institutional arrangement in the near future. Am I right?
Yeah, and then I said opportunities are available already, as I showed you. It's up to you whether or not you want to get these opportunities realized. It's up to the colleagues of ASEAN by securing highest level of political will of the society as a whole.
I think I give this work to Dr. Nuki, okay? Dr. Nuki, you take it. This is your job now to move on this momentum. So I think the time is quite coming near. Allow me to, I think I have another question for Professor Chung, but anyway, allow me to move on. Dr. Sung Sam, please. Dr. Sung Sam, interesting that you mentioned about the finance mechanism, you know, when I hear your presentation. But anyway, I think you know, the role of Korea in supporting ASEAN can levelize the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework definitely. Would you perhaps clarify a bit on the impact, and you know, if we follow this kind of route? So what would be the impact to the region in pursuing this? And maybe another question is that you know, what would be the suggestion from your side on the potential cooperation when ASEAN need to learn from you on the process of the loan conversion model? I mean, from loan to grant. It is very interesting, as you mentioned in your presentation. Perhaps you can elaborate a little bit more, Dr. Sung Sang, with some example. Loan to grant. Any challenges in the process? Any difficulty or things like that?
Okay, thank you for your questions. And so I go for the first question. Yeah. Regarding, but I think the first question already answered by the Professor Chung. So yeah, I think because of the limited time, I don't want to add more regarding the first questions, and then I think it might be better for answering for your second question regarding the loan conversion model. Yeah. Yeah, the challenge is, yeah, as I mentioned in my presentation, it was very conceptual so far. Yeah, and it had never applied to actual project yet. And I think it seems it will take some time to address this model because of some issues to resolve. For example, yeah, in these loan conversion models, the grant agents, yeah, provide the grant, but and how much and why. So first, in the first step, between the two donors agencies, the EDCF and the grant agents in South Korea, mostly the KUICA, should be, yeah, resolving some consensus, and that's the one problem. And the next problem is how to who and how to evaluate the outcomes, the performance, because it depends on the payment of the grant. It depends on the result, but and it requires some evaluation, and so it also is one issue. And this kind of things, yeah, certainly increase the total cost of the project. So that also is another issue. So there are many issues, and that's why it's just conceptual and not implemented yet. But I think the reason for paying attention to this model is its replicability. So if we replace the EDCF with private investors, then it becomes the development impact bonds model, which has a huge potential to mobilize the private investment. And so it's a very good measure to fill out the financing gap. So I think that's why I focused on this loan conversion model. And I think in near futures, maybe we can implement, even though it's a pilot, we can implement some, ODA project based on this model. So I think as researchers, I also interested with to do a joint study regarding this model, see if the Asian countries are interested in this model. Yeah.
You know, in your view, how would be the perspective, or how would be the view of other financial institutes, for example, this kind of thing apply to them, for example, for bank, ADB, or even some funding agency to use the loan conversion model? Are they trying to use the same model as yours?
Actually, it's not, yeah. Some FDIs like World Bank and ADBs, yeah, they are. I'm not so sure, but they are trying to apply, but not the loan conversion model, but the general DIB model, development impact bonds models. Yeah, they are quite interested in that model. Yeah.
All right, so we look on that one and try to follow. Another question maybe to compensate the first one is that, so if we have to apply the Green New Deal strategy, you know, how we can balance the emission reduction, as you know that the key role of fossil fuels still continue, right, to play, you know, in the demand that will maybe increasing after the COVID-19. So what will happen to the existing like gas or even coal power generation, or things like that? Or do you think that the low carbon alternative solution can play a role, you know, to the renewable energy intermittency? Like Ambassador mentioned this, Professor Chung, you mentioned about the LNG, hydrogen, ammonia, CCUS battery. What do you think about this? How you balance this? Why you apply the Green New Deal?
Yeah.
To make it not too extreme. Can you tell?
Are you asking me or to?
Maybe I asking both of you, but maybe Professor can mention that too. You are the policy guy.
Well, I think just please remember that, for instance, 10 sectors and 10 technologies that I shared are the reflection of the specific situation in Korea. Okay, so of course, if we take a look at the global trend, Korea is a pretty much leading country in having the developing the advanced technology that I listed. These can be the sources of the global, I would say, green growth, right? And then to apply this to ASEAN region, first of all, as I said, we need to have a feasibility study. What is the current status of the ASEAN region? And then are there any potential that the specific technologies or sectors can be employed and developed based on the resources in ASEAN in principle, together with some assistance from outside, including ODA sources, okay? And then, as I said, that if so, then we can develop the good policy framework. We usually do, roadmap, right? So in 5 years, in 10 years, I think, using the general timeline of the Paris Agreement implementation, because then by doing so, ASEAN can share the good outcomes in the UNFCCC process as well, okay? And then if these things can be done rightly in the context of NDC, I'm sure that there are a lot of opportunities in getting funding, not only from the public sector, like GCF, ADB, or even ODA sources, but also seemingly ASEAN needs to get the private sector involved. I think they would be very much interested in coming to ASEAN region as well. So I would say these are some of the general response to your question, if that is okay with it.
I think it's quite okay, quite clear that we have to. I mean, actually, the same question. Maybe Dr. Sufika, you are the ASEAN man also. Could you perhaps, your view a bit on how to balance this kind of thing between transition from fossil to non-fossil or clean energy technologies during this time? Is that any burden on that?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a very challenging questions. As everybody know here, the ASEAN is actually very dependent on fossil fuel currently, coal in power sector and petroleum products in transportation. And the fossil fuel use is huge. So moving this, I mean, let's say this is a ship that's going for fossil fuel. So moving this towards the renewable energies will not be easy. Sudden move will make a lot of structural change in the economy, as you might know. And our area is actually projected that for the baseline scenario, fossil fuel is still huge up to 2040. even the APS, the most sustainable scenario, still has fossil fuel in it. So it's a huge challenges, mainly first because it's a huge usage currently. Finding its alternative will be a challenge, but it's not impossible, of course. Second is that to really move this ship into sustainable future, I mean, our own capacity might not be enough. We need strong collaborations within countries in the region, but also between the regions and its partners. ASEAN Plus 3 is a very good platform, but also with other institutions. On first, like how to do that, to find the proper pathway to reach this net zero, for example, after 2050 or something. And the second is to really fill in the gap that we are currently having in pursuing this energy transition. There are many gaps, but the few that we identify here in ACE, the first is in the finance. There's a very huge gap in the finance. There are more finance for energy efficiency, for example, finance for renewable energy projects. The second is probably in the capacity of the government in developing the policies, in developing the PPAs, for example, PPA for the renewable energy projects, but also on the technical capacity. What I mean is that in the future, when the energy system is already climate friendly, we have a lot of renewables, we have a lot of energy efficiency appliances, we have electric vehicles on the road. How can the countries in the regions environmentally like support this energy transition? Meaning that the jobs, the local industries and others needs to be geared towards that. And I think, as I mentioned, to move this ship, we really require like a lot of support from outside. And I think the GreenODA mentioned before, the innovative financing, the loan conversion to grant may be very important. It's quite similar actually with the result-based payment in the RED Plus. So I think that kind of policies are really important in helping the ASEAN region to move towards this sustainable future. I think that would be my answer.
Great. Thank you so much. Very nice indeed to clarify this issue. Dr. Sumsang, I think your view on this perhaps almost similar, but however, I'd like another question for you with that. We heard from Deputy Secretary this morning that not only the pragmatic renewable technologies will be the main key to achieve carbon neutrality goal, right? We heard that. So if not so, what is your view on the like I said, the low carbon alternative solution? Because we have the renewable intermittency, right? This is very important. So how this technology will come up, and do you think it's time for this kind of technologies to come up or not? From LNG, hydrogen, ammonia, CCUS, or even batteries, energy storage, or any hybrid? Because EV is coming and other things will coming. So do you think it's time or not to do it, in your view? Dr. Samsung.
Okay. I'd like to add the answer for the previous question regarding the fossil fuels and the coal and LNG very shortly. Because it's a very controversial issue, and still it's an issue in. So I think the primary purpose of Green New Deal ODA is to induce the technology progress of clean energy and the price competitiveness, so that in the market, the economy, the industry choose the clean energy. So I think that's the role of the Green New Deal ODA, Green New Deal strategies, Green New Deal. And for the second question about the
technology.
Pardon?
About technologies, yes. The low carbon alternative solutions, as Deputy Secretary mentioned.
So regarding the questions, I think the renewable, because of the volatility, to fill out the volatility of the renewable energy, it also is important to develop another technologies like and you mentioned the CCUS and ESS and hydrogen and etc. And I think in Korea, the hydrogen is one of the key issues the government
Right. That's true. That's true.
Yeah,
because I
focused on.
I heard about hydrogen economy from Korea many years ago.
Yeah.
I think we have done long ago, put a lot of research and development, right? So I think you should be one of the most advanced in hydrogen, definitely.
Yeah, that's one of the key alternative solution for the low carbon society. Yeah, and Korea is one of the leading countries in the world for the hydrogen economies. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. That's great. So I think it's time to look into this, because the reason is that when I see your first presentation, you export this kind of thing already, right? This is part of your energy product in terms of export. So that means you already advanced in that. So anyway, that's okay, because this issue, we cannot escape when all gonna go to COP26. So this issue gonna be the quite issue at the COP26 definitely. So everybody need to go to COP26 with their own stance clear. So with that, even Thailand also, we also do the same thing. So with that, MC, do we have any minutes left or time's up?
Yes, Dr. Virawat.
Yes.
I think we can now continue to the next agenda, which is the wrap up of the event. So please allow me to give some.
So with that, may I say a word before we stop this session, right? Of course, we like to thanks all the three speakers. So I think for me, when I hear this presentation from you, I think for the energy transition alone, we are at the crossroad, but the choices are clear, I think, when I heard. And then we hope that I think that we can intensify, as Professor Chung mentioned, we can intensify the effort to promote the ASEAN Korea cooperation under the Green New Deal policy. And I think I so believe that the Korean model should be the role model of ASEAN member states, definitely to follow. So in line with APAIC, in line with ACRF. And definitely, I think the strategy that we heard, the strategy part toward net zero carbon is still controversy in some sense, but it's clear. I think it's very clear. But I think to me, the carbon neutrality is indeed a process of revolution, where someone needs to pay the price. So even though the net zero part may seem narrow, but achievable, in my opinion, toward practical, this is a good word that I learned from this today, toward practical reality with the algorithm or mechanism to support like finance and what we heard from three experts today. So with that, I think that my time is up. So please join me a big applause to all our speakers. I think very nice indeed, and this includes and concludes my panel discussion. Thank you very much, and back to you, MC.
Thank you very much, Dr. Virawat. I think from Republic of Korea Mission has something to say. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm Councillor Jia Choi at the Korean Mission to ASEAN. Thank you for your presentation today. And as you mentioned, the ASEAN is heavily dependent on the fossil fuels like coal. So I think in the respect, I think ASEAN is the right place to reduce carbon emission globally. So I hope through the close cooperation between ASEAN and Korea, we contribute to the global reduction of carbon emission in the region. That's my brief comment. And my ambassador left earlier for another appointment, but he really appreciated all the presentation from three speakers, and he'd like to invite Dr. Jung and Professor Jung from Korea to Jakarta as soon as the COVID situation settled down. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, please allow me to give some wrap up and some key takeaway for this event today. So first, COVID-19 pandemic has brought in unprecedented challenges for the region's energy sector, such as falling electricity demand, disrupted energy supply chain, and delays in renewable energy project development. However, it has also bring opportunities for the inclusion of sustainable and green recovery element as the core strategy. Second, ASEAN has adopted the ACRF and APIC as the regional blueprint for sustainable post-pandemic recovery, while Korea adopted the energy transition policy, Green New Deal, and policy in carbon neutrality 2050 under the Moon administration as a response to the climate change crisis and post-pandemic sustainable recovery strategy. Third, under the APIC, ASEAN will accelerate energy transition and strengthen energy resilience through the implementation of 7 program areas, including EENC and IRI. Various decarbonization potential are identified for key energy-consuming sectors, power, transport, and industry. Next is the Green New Deal OGA strategies aims to strengthen cooperation and support for developing countries to recover from pandemic crisis, and achieving green transition through project activity support capacity building and public awareness. And the last point is ASEAN and Korea needs to further strengthen its energy cooperation and develop a green partnership, including identifying key cooperation area based on AMC's NDCs, APIC program areas, and 10 key technology and policy priorities of Korea's carbon neutrality. Developing joint project initiatives and proposal, building capacity or policy infrastructure through workshops or training programs such as through Korean ASEAN Climate Change Forum, intensifying climate change mitigation efforts such as improving EE and CCUS deployment, internalizing climate change through energy convergence, exploring innovative finance model, and developing high education degree program. And now let's move on to the last agenda. Before I close this event, I would like to invite Dr. Nuki Agia Utama, the Executive Director of ACE, to deliver the closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Nela. I think this very good opportunities for us to be here. I would like to also convey my gratitude to His Excellency Mr. Ling Sung-nam, the Ambassador of the Republic of Korea to ASEAN, His Excellency Mr. Satvinder Singh, the Deputy Secretary General for ASEAN Economic Community, and also, of course, my colleague, Dr. Virawat Chantanakome, as a moderator. You've done very well, sir. And also distinguished speakers, Dr. Zulfikar Junaidi, Professor Chung Song Yung, and also Dr. Chung Sung Sam. First of all, I would like to express my sincerest appreciation to the Korean mission to ASEAN for collaborating with ACE in organizing the 3rd New Southern Policy Forum on synergy between Korea, Green New Deal, and ASEAN Initiative on Green Recovery and Energy Transition. And also I would like to thank the distinguished speakers and moderators for giving insightful information on both ASEAN and Korea's energy transition, cooperation, and initiative. We have experienced vast challenges from the COVID-19 pandemic, which not only impacting our socio-economic life, but also the energy sector. Energy plays a crucial role in the post-pandemic recovery and has been the main priority of the governments, including the ASEAN member states and also Korea. The conduct of this forum is very timely since it is touching the recent development and agenda of ASEAN member states and Korea towards energy transition, green growth, and sustainable recovery. We have seen from our distinguished experts that there are various approaches and strategies established by Korea and ASEAN to achieve a sustainable recovery as well as addressing climate change issues, including the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, or ACRF, and the Korea Green New Deal. Furthermore, in ASEAN, the implementation of the ACRF will be complemented by the regional blueprints, the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation, or APIC, Phase 2, 2021-2025, which has been endorsed by the 38 ASEAN Ministers on Energy meeting in 2020. The APIC will also serve a pathway to accelerate the energy transition and strengthen energy resilience through greater innovation, cooperation, and partnership. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the energy transition efforts towards sustainable growth and recovery will require extensive collaboration and partnerships, including between ASEAN and Korea. The third New Southern Policy Forum have provided a platform for ASEAN and Korea to share knowledge and experience about their policies and practices on green recovery and energy transition, and exchange views on promoting ASEAN-Korea cooperation toward sustainable growth. Moving forward, we hope that this forum we would able to see tangible cooperation between ASEAN region and Korea in accelerating energy transition and resilience towards sustainable recovery and addressing climate change issue. Again, on behalf of the ASEAN Center for Energy, I would like to express my sincere gratitude and warm wishes to all of you. Stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you for your kind attention. Back to you, Neil.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nuki. Ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up our event today. On behalf of the ASEAN Center for Energy and Korean Mission to ASEAN, I would like to thank you very much for joining us today and looking forward to meeting you in another event. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kap. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Virawat, Dr. Sung Yong Chun, Dr. Subikar, and also Dr. Chung Song Sam for the perfect presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank
Have
you,
a nice day.
thank you, Dr. Sum. Thank you, Dr. Sufika. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Nuki. Thank you so much. See you soon.
See you soon. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.